classmates. My name is Joey Schillender.
I'm Nathan Tanko.
I'm Michael Patterson.
I'm Ben Cody.
And we're going to talk about deforestation. Next slide. Deforestation is a huge problem and it affects all sides of the spectrum, and it needs to be solved. Every year, deforestation cuts down 7 billion trees. This has huge impacts on the economy and the natural health of all the forest and the animals that live in the forest. Deforestation is a very large problem, and we need to put forward solutions to solve it. If we do not mitigate the detrimental effects of deforestation, the natural and economic lenses will be hurt very much.
Next slide. So, there are many environmental consequences of deforestation, but the main ones are threats to biodiversity and increased carbon dioxide concentrations in our Earth's atmosphere. When forests are cleared, the lack of biodiversity can affect more than just the species living in that area. One example was based on research conducted at the Cary Institute of Ecosystem Studies in Millbrook, New York. As forest habitat in this region was lost, the population of opossum, a strongly buffering species, dwindled as the numbers of white-footed mice, a species responsible for the spread of Lyme disease, increased. As a result, instances of Lyme disease among humans in this area have also increased. This shows how lack of biodiversity can affect humans just as much as the animals living there. The second environmental consequence of deforestation is increased carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, stated that, quote, carbon dioxide concentrations have increased substantially, rising from an annual average of 240 parts per million in the late 1700s to 201 parts per million in 2015, a 43% increase. These increasing concentrations are contributing to climate change, and we need to decrease those concentrations to counteract global warming. While deforestation isn't the only thing contributing to these increasing concentrations, it still needs to be stopped.
In addition to the environmental effects that deforestation has, deforestation also impacts the economy. In the fishing industry, the hunting industry, and most importantly, the national parks industry. To begin, fishing industry generates about $145 billion annually, according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. Also, according to Cambridge University, when deforestation occurs, debris can get into the water, killing off fish, which will in turn hurt the fishing industry. The hunting industry, according to the Animal Use Issues Committee of the International Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, hunting is a $67 billion industry, generating about 1 million jobs per year. According to government accounts, as you can see on this graph, deforestation per day can take away up to $2.3 million from the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. As you can see, deforestation really affects the economy.
Alright, so we have many proposed solutions. Next slide. The first one is replenishing lost trees, or reforestation. This would require large amounts of trees to be planted in areas where large portions of forest were cleared. Reforestation wouldn't just be randomly planting trees where there are none, but rather strategically planting them to have the most positive effect. John Townsend, a well-known writer and outspoken environmentalist, said in an article that, quote, it's not just the trees that matter, but what kind of trees. If you're really thinking about getting carbon dioxide out of our atmosphere, then tropical forests are the ones that end up mattering the most. Townsend also said that, quote, simply stopping deforestation could allow forests to absorb 37% of our annual carbon emissions. Replenishing degraded areas could do significantly more for the planet. An implication of this solution would be that forests would be replenished, and if done on a large enough scale, they would decrease carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere. An article by the NC State College of Agriculture and Life Sciences stated that, quote, an acre of trees absorb enough carbon dioxide in a year to equal the amount produced when you drive a car 26,000 miles. It would also increase biodiversity in those areas and decrease the amount of disease-causing pathogens. The hunting and fishing industry would also greatly benefit from reforestation, and like Mikey said, national parks would get much more annual tourism. Some of the limitations to this solution are that planting trees on that large of a scale is extremely difficult and requires a lot of resources. Another limitation to this solution is that any benefits that will come from reforestation take a very long time to come into effect. Kathleen Brahick, a writer and researcher for New Scientist, said in an article that, quote, according to a study focusing on the Brazilian Atlantic forest, Certain aspects can return surprisingly quickly, within 65 years. But for the landscape to truly regain its native identity, it takes a lot longer, up to 4,000 years. The last limitation to this solution is that most of the forest land that is cleared is used for agriculture and wouldn't be suitable to grow trees anymore. More resources would need to be poured into those forests for those areas to grow back.
So the second proposed solution would be to implement laws and regulations to help combat this problem. Laws and regulations would be able to apportion the forests, and it would limit cutting down trees. So laws and regulations would be good because it can mandate and limit the amount of trees being cut down every year, and you can section off parts of the forest. From Greenpeace, a 45-year environmentalist organization, said, globally, we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from deforestation in developing nations, especially those with tropical forests. Like Nathan said, the tropical forests take the most carbon dioxide out of the air. And again from Greenpeace, in the United States, laws like the Endangered Species Act, the Wilderness Act, the Lacey Act, and the Roadless Rule help protect our forests and stop illegal wood products from entering the U.S. marketplace. To begin the implications and limitations. If parts of the forest are made into national parks, biodiversity will remain high. There will be no increase in carbon concentrations, and there is lots of money to be made. According to the government's report of the National Parks Money Status of 2016, 331 million visitors spent $18.4 billion in national parks. They made 318.1 thousand jobs, $12 billion in labor income, and an additional $34.9 billion added to the nation's economy. The limitations are that there will always be opposition to everything. In any two-year given session of Congress, there's about 7,000 bills that are introduced, but only about 4% of these actually become law, and from this you can imagine just how many of them are actually passed unanimously. The pros are that it will be very powerful and it can have very large effects, and there really are no cons to the solution.
Alright, through our research we have found that deforestation is a growing problem and that we need to implement both of these solutions. In order to disincentivize further deforestation to happen in the world, we need to implement laws and regulations to stop people from cutting down these trees, which have terrible effects. Also, we need to implement reforestation. When we plant the trees, we are getting more, that the environment is benefiting and also the economy. So for a better world with less deforestation and better effects, we need to implement both of these solutions. Thank you.